Welcome to the Authentic Dentist Podcast. Join Dr. Allison House of House Dental in Scottsdale and Shawn Zajas, founder of Zana, a company helping dentists extend their care beyond the chair as they lead dentists deeper along the journey of authenticity to reach greater fulfillment in their professional lives and to deliver remarkable patient experiences. At the core of the Authentic Dentist is a belief that the answer to the current challenges in dentistry is dentists discovering that their greatest asset and point of differentiation is their personal brand, and that forming that brand out of their authentic selves is the best strategy for success in dentistry today.
So this podcast is brought to you by Zana. And Zana makes electric toothbrushes, but it's more than that. They have a program that'll grow your practice with their electric toothbrushes.
Hey guys, this is Shawn and Dr. Allison House with the Authentic Dentist Podcast. And we're coming to you guys from 2023. Happy New Year. And today we're talking about something that actually happened over the holidays. Something that doesn't seem that weird. You know, travel plans go awry. There's always something with airlines if there's weather, but this time it was different. So what exactly happened, Dr. House?
Happy New Year, Shawn. So I was actually in Germany during all of this. So I didn't actually experience it because Southwest Airlines obviously doesn't fly to Germany. So I just read about it.
They're just still domestic, right?
Right. But as many of you know, Southwest Airlines canceled thousands of flights. Just canceled thousands of flights. Now, at first they blamed it on the weather because we had a huge cold front. But Delta, American, United, they did not cancel thousands of flights. They canceled a few, but Delta could not get back together. And I just thought it was really interesting to watch a very big company suffer in such a way.
So what do you think, like Delta, American, was it like maybe hundreds or just like, 10 to 50? Do we have any idea in comparison what like a normal storm might cause an inconvenience of flights? Like,
I actually can't tell you, but I can tell you that the magnitude was unbelievable.
Okay.
With Southwest.
Now, how did it come out that it wasn't just because of the storm?
So a pilot published this article on what had actually happened in Southwest, and it was just so interesting. So he was saying that Herb Kelleher, I believe that's his name, was the CEO for like 20 years. He retired in 2004. And he was the kind of leader that we all want to be. He was on the ground operations. He's the one that made Southwest what it is today. This famous airline. Everybody loves to fly Southwest. They're funny. It's a really warm, wonderful place to work.
So like the culture of it, he created.
He created it. So he retired in 2004, and another person took over, and that person was an accountant. And so he was much more interested in profit. He was much more interested in stocks and shareholders, which obviously needs to be looked at. I get that. We all need to look at the bottom line. But he wasn't paying attention to what was happening in operations. So he just let things slide. So he retired, and a new CEO was placed in 2022. And the new CEO noticed there were some problems. And one of the biggest problems was that the software that gets people scheduled and the planes at the right place was from the 90s.
So basically, the software they were using
in 2022
to run their company, this sophisticated, the Southwest Airlines, was a software that they hadn't updated since the 90s.
Yep. So here's the big thing. People had been telling them that there was a problem with this software. And we've seen it. Southwest Airlines has had several times when there were lots of flights canceled and they said it was due to the weather, but other airlines didn't have to cancel. So there have been glitches in this system, but this was a complete meltdown.
I remember some times during COVID, and I thought it was because of the staff shortage. Now, maybe it wasn't just that, because I think there was something about the vaccine and certain pilots or employees striking And that's the news that got the headline. But you wonder if behind the scenes, some of the cancellations, it probably was also because this system was slowly starting to falter.
It was. I mean, the pilot said that it has had a number of times when it was very obvious that it needed to be upgraded, and it wasn't.
Okay, I don't like where this is going because as a business owner, yeah, the connections are just, because it's an indictment, right? Like there's always something where, I don't know, maybe if we just don't want to acknowledge it because it means money, it means time, it means, plus the whole adage, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like sometimes it seems like that's good to go by. Other times the break could be catastrophic and maybe you need to plan a little bit more.
I mean, think about our patients, though. They come in with a broken tooth. It doesn't hurt. And they're like, doc, it'll be fine. But you know that's brewing. And someday, you don't know when, that's going to blow up on them. Usually on Christmas Day, 4th of July, some moment when you cannot help them. So I do think that we need to take a look at our businesses and really your life. Where are those warning signs that there's something happening and you're just pushing it under the rug? And how can we just take a step back and acknowledge, okay, that does need to be fixed?
So I'm thinking, though, on the other perspective, like, what about Y2K? Like, what about the times where we thought something's coming, watch out, buckle down, and we just totally overestimated the impact? Because isn't that, I mean, I could be wrong. I was still in high school, maybe at that time. But that's what I remember. What do you remember from Y2K?
I remember that they figured out this was a huge problem and they started working on it. And that's why it wasn't a huge problem.
Okay.
That was that was averting the disaster.
Okay. So it's because they actually did do something appropriate. It wasn't just because they prognosticated that some collapse was going to happen and it wasn't as bad as they thought.
Now, I wasn't that old, but I was not in high school. But I do remember that a lot of people worked hard on that so that we didn't have a meltdown.
Okay, we'll have to do some fact checking after this just to see, because I'm really curious. I just remember it was like they thought it was going to be the end of most things digital and commerce based at the time, because everything, the whole infrastructure was just based off of
2 zeros.
Right. Or no, it couldn't handle 2 zeros. Like, so it could only go, I don't even remember. Like, right? It could do like the 99, but it couldn't go.
Yeah. It couldn't roll over.
Yeah.
So they fixed it.
Okay. Well, if you're out there and you know the answer, definitely step in. So basically there's not really a good example of when.
Well, that's what's always interesting. Think about all of the CDC warnings over the years. You know, they thought hantavirus is going to be this big deal. They thought the pig flu is going to be the bird flu. But because they acted on it, it wasn't. You only see the catastrophic thing if nobody has acknowledged there's a problem and tried to fix it. If the problem just gets swept under the rug. So we know about those things. It's the things we're not paying attention to.
Yeah, I watched some of those, like CIA type TV shows. So I was watching Jack Ryan, and the whole time it's like, is your intel good enough? Like, can we trust this intel, or are you kind of reading into things and we don't need to overreact? And his whole thing was, remember September 11th. So it's this whole idea of like, man, it's never worth like what just happened with Southwest. Thousands.
I think that, you can hunt through your business and do all of that. But I also think there's moments when you're just like, oh, that should be fixed. Like if you go over to your medical emergency kit, I happen to do this, and notice that one of the items was expired, that needs to be fixed. Now, I've never used it. It may never happen. But the moment that I need that, that has to be fixed. I'm not suggesting that you start looking for things, but if something pops up in your face, don't ignore it, because at some point this is going to be a problem.
Yeah, I know here. So this was like, maybe 12 years ago when we were just manufacturing manual toothbrushes. we had a custom batch of brushes that was for a specific account of ours. It was an insurance company. And they didn't buy all the brushes that year. And then they didn't buy any the next year. So we ended up housing them. It was a Blue Cross Blue Shield, like of Michigan or something like that. And we had them in our warehouse. And like 4 or 5 years later, all of a sudden we're aware, because of just the heat, the plastic was more brittle. So now all of a sudden it was this whole idea of like, we have this inventory, but we probably can't sell it because of the liability of the neck snapping. There's this one toothbrush company. I don't actually know the company, but they made almost like these acrylic, almost like clear handles. I can't say what it's called. I just remember the name of the actual brush. And they were known for snapping. And not only did they snap, but when they snapped, they were like very jagged, which obviously is dangerous if it's in someone's mouth. So we were aware of that. And we're just like, you know what? Like, I think we just need to just trash them and eat the loss, whatever it was. I mean, the account had previously paid for the whole order. So everything else was just going to be profit. But it was one of those like, man, this could come back to bite us if we don't just do the right thing, And thankfully it wasn't like an infrastructure thing, because I think that's the hardest, especially like if you spent X amount of money. So I think like practice management systems, that's a big investment.
It's a huge investment.
What, like between 50 and 100,000, or not quite?
I paid $50,000 in 2002.
Okay.
So
Are you still with the same one?
I'm with the same one, but I do update it.
Okay. But it'd be hard to make a big move, let's say, because you feel very invested in it. It's almost like my dad at one point bought a QuickBooks version that didn't need to be like it wasn't when there were subscriptions. It was like you just buy it outright. And then all of a sudden QuickBooks changed their model, and he's like, I'm not switching to that because I'm going to get as much juice as I can out of this program, even if they're not supporting it, simply because I paid for it, but that got to like bad thinking of like certain functions weren't working, and then they stopped supporting certain stuff. And at some point we had to make the whole leap, and people were like, what took you guys so long? It's like, well, it's just that tension of like, we kind of wanted to ignore, as long as we could, the fact that we were going to have to make a big expense, migrate all of our data over. So in the case of Southwest, could you imagine?
I mean, I can't imagine how expensive it is to buy software for an airline like that. Maybe it has to be actually developed.
Yeah, I think it needs to be custom made to some extent. I don't know if there's like enterprise level airline software.
I don't know. But I also think that you have to pay attention to where you're investing your money in your business. And you do want to do things that are outward facing so that patients, the public, your employees see that you've invested in the business. But yeah, sometimes you have to invest in the things that nobody sees. Like everybody hates to put a new roof on their house. I hate it. Nobody can see it. Nobody cares. But if you don't, at some point, you're going to have a leak. And that's going to be worse.
So I've owned my home now. Maybe like, oh, sorry, I should know. My daughter was born at the same time. So 9 years now. And we haven't had to replace the AC. And we hear it was original from when the house was built, which I think was 2003. So it's been 20 years. And I don't think units typically go beyond that. So it's like this, I'm aware of it. And yeah, so I mean, we have money ready for it, but it's just one of those things where it's like, I almost want to kind of stay in denial that, oh, it's going to be fine. But it's like, no, they have their lifespans. At some point, you just need to replace it,
And it's not fun, but it is easier to do it on a scheduled than to pay for it on an emergency basis, if you think about it.
So where else does this show up in dentistry? Because I know in like the human, like HR, I think we've probably had that where it's an employee that you just kind of, I think that's probably the most common. It's an employee, you probably know that you've had them too long, but you don't really know what to do. And it's too much of a hassle to deal with it now, so you kind of just let it wait.
But we all know when you kick the can down, it gets worse. The problem gets worse. So it's easier to deal with it right away. It's not pleasant.
Sounds like a lesson on like your health as well, right?
Well, I mean, I do think when I think of Southwest, I do kind of think about my health too. Okay, am I ignoring something about my body? Because we all have that where, your blood pressure is a little too high and then you don't get any medication. And then 10 years later, you have a stroke because you didn't pay attention. And do I want to take blood pressure medication? No, I do not. But I also recognize that the alternative is not good.
I just remember Brian Regan, comedian, and one of the things that cracked me up was he's like, yeah, I went to go see my doctor the other day and go figure my cholesterol was high. It was the year before and I didn't do anything different. It was something to the effect of like, I'd already found out that it was high. So chances are it's still going to be high because I didn't change anything. And I feel like that's the same thing. Southwest kept getting the reports from their employees that were frontline employees that were using the software. And here's the feedback that the managers kept giving. We need to change this. We need to update it. That this is not going to scale. This is not going to be able to continue to serve us. It probably was breaking in all these minor ways that they saw all the time.
But, I mean, it was still working. So why would I want to invest, I don't know how much money on this? But they knew. And now this disaster, I don't know how much it's going to cost them, but it's going to be very expensive. And they're still going to have to replace the software.
So industry-wise, I wouldn't say it's the same exact thing, but what about like X-rays when they switched to digital? Was that kind of one of those like people knew it's going to be inevitable, but let's hold out as long as we can?
Oh, yeah. People were all over the board. And the first digital X-rays weren't as clear. And so people did want to keep their film. So, yeah, people transitioned. But at some point, you can't be the last person that's still using film. You have to move on. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's on the same level because I do think there's things that you need to do to upgrade your business. But that's not the same as finding something that absolutely has to be dealt with.
No, it's like VHS and DVD or, when all of a sudden it switched. It's not like you had to get a DVD player, even though you knew at some point the VHSs were going to stop being supported because that was more just a innovation in technology, like the X-rays. But with Southwest, it was just this is going to be a really big expense, a really big investment. Like you said, Gary Kelly, the one CEO, was much more numbers-based accountant, was focusing on the shareholders, getting good ROI, and was kind of neglecting the operational side. And it's like, at what point is the breakdown going to lead to a breakdown? And then I guess that's what just happened.
And no one will ever forget this. I mean, Southwest will be known for this for a long time. And that sort of reputation, you don't want that. You don't want to have that holding over your head for a long period of time.
Is that what's happening in the news? Or you're just saying because of how many people were displaced that the sentiment is just like, it was egregious that they allowed this to happen? Is that kind of the...
It's been all over the news. Customers, even the government is like, you're going to have to compensate all these people. Yeah. So, this is a big problem. And it would be the same thing for your business. If you decided there was a leak under your slab and you decided to ignore it for, 10, 15 years, some point when the whole floor caves in, that's bad. And that's going to cost you a lot of money, much more than just fixing the leak.
Okay, so going into this year, we're not just saying, hey, try to be honest about areas that might be declining. Although that is probably the big lesson here is don't neglect the obvious. But aside from that, what are we?
I think there's two big lessons here. So the first one is, yes, look around, and when you see something, don't just press escape and pretend it didn't happen. If there is something wrong, you need to pay attention. But I also think that as we move into 2023, you should look and see all the great things that you did last year too. I bet you did make some improvements. I bet maybe you didn't fix your air conditioning, but maybe you fixed your kitchen. I mean, you do have to sort of celebrate all those wonderful things that you did do and that are paying off that no one else is noticing.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Dentist Podcast. To join Allison and Shawn on this journey, hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode. Here's to your success. Express yourself fully. Live authentic.